Okay, let's try that again. I just recorded a whole video for you guys and then I proceeded to accidentally delete it. So here we go again. This is part 3 of the Advent Challenge that I've been bringing to you all this week, where we have been talking about how we can get ready in order to be ready when Jesus comes again. When he comes, period. Because if you remember, there are 3 different ways that Jesus comes to us. He comes to us in the Nativity at Christmas. He comes to us in his second coming, or he will come to us for his second coming. And then every day, in every moment, he wants to come into your heart through his grace, his gift of grace that is brought to you through the Holy Spirit. So that is what we're talking about this week. And guess what I realized earlier today? This is the exact center, I guess technically if it were the middle of the day, it would be the exact center of the season of Advent for this year. So today is the middle and it's the middle of the week. How wild is that? So here we are in the middle, and today I wanted to share with you the next way that we can get ready in order to be ready for Jesus. And that is to pay attention to what we are listening to. We always have to listen, right? We have to listen for God's voice. We have to listen for what he wants of us. We have to listen for his will. But the thing is, there's a whole lot of other things that we listen to every day also. And sometimes those can get in the way of being able to hear God's voice and hear his will. So, and when I say listen, please understand it's very rare for it to actually be an audible sound that you hear through your ears. It's more like a sense of you notice a thought and it just kind of, it feels like that thought just spoke right to your heart. And there's like a knowing. There's a sense of knowing of where that might be coming from. And it's important to hold it up to reason and to hold it up to the teachings of the church to know where that voice is coming from. So, little side note there about when I say listening for God's voice, that is the kind of thing that I mean. So, 3 points that I wanted to make about listening today. The first is to pay attention to what are you consuming with your ears? What are you listening to day in and day out? Because that is one of the things that really affects your mind. It affects your conscious and your subconscious, and the way that those offer information to you, that your subconscious offers information to your conscious mind, and it affects your ability to choose God's will. So it's important to realize what you are consuming. So I'm talking about in what we listen to as far as music goes, or other forms of media. What about movies that we might watch, or social media, or also, even if it's not media, it can be the things that people say to you. It can be the things that you hear people saying to each other. It can be things you're hearing on the news. There I go back to media again, right? And here's an important one. It's also the thoughts inside your mind, the things that you are saying to yourself. it is so important to be aware of those thoughts, especially if they're not very nice to you. Sometimes those thoughts can be downright mean. They can be full of shame and pain, and sometimes they can be really sneaky and not obvious. They can even be, I've heard some coaches describe thoughts sometimes as pretty thoughts. It's like you would think that it would be a thought that would serve you well, but then when you really examine it, you discover that it doesn't actually serve you at all. For example, that could be something like, let's say that you want to do something and maybe it's kind of bold. Maybe it's a bit risky. Maybe it's definitely something you've never done before. Your thoughts, your mind can offer you thoughts like, are you sure you want to do that? You've never done that before. Oh, you're definitely going to fail. That is not something that's for you. That is for other people. Because our brains like to keep us safe. That's their main job, is to keep us safe. And so we have to hold these thoughts up to reason and God's truth. And that is when we can discover if they actually will serve us or not. And that is so important, especially if you believe that God is calling you to something and it's scary or some big goal. I hope that your goals are scary, actually, because it's only when we stretch ourselves outside of our comfort zone that we actually grow. It's so true. So that's the first one. What are you consuming? Okay. The second point is I wanted to make a distinction about active listening versus passive listening. So active listening, let's start with passive actually. Passive listening is when you've got things going on in the background and it's like maybe you have music going in the background, or you have, this time of year, maybe you've got a Christmas movie playing in the background or something like that, or, some other show. Maybe you have a podcast playing in the background, or and you're not really paying close attention to it. Maybe it is, like I said earlier, maybe it's conversations between other people that you're overhearing. I think a lot of people put on news in the background. So all of these different things that you might be consuming in your listening, those are passive listening. Okay, I have one more example for you. I'm a mom of 4, as you may know, and how many of you have had this experience where your child, especially your teenagers, I would say that this happens for teenagers, unless you've learned how to not do this by the time they're teenagers. But how many of you will ask your child in the morning, how did you sleep? And then you proceed to keep busy with whatever you're doing in the kitchen and you don't actually listen to their answer. I have been guilty of this, I promise. I definitely have. I really try to avoid doing that, especially now that I realize that I have done that in the past, but certainly it has happened. So that's an example of passive listening, when you kind of tune out. And hopefully, I know it happens. This can happen with our spouses. This can happen with any relationship that we have. Maybe it's a coworker, maybe it's, again, your kids or another relative. It happens. So we get to be more careful about trying to do this other kind of listening, and that is the active listening. So when we're active listening, we are actually paying attention to the lyrics in the song. We're paying attention to the conversation that's happening in the movie that we're watching. What are the things that they're talking about? What are the things that they're referring to? What are the inferences being made in the conversation in the movie? Or we're actively paying attention to what's being said on the podcast. Or again, in relationships, when you ask someone a question, or even if you didn't ask them a question, but they are talking to you, are you actively listening? And guess what? A relationship with God is no different. We need to actively listen for God's voice. And it can be difficult. As I said, those other things that we're listening to can make it harder to hear God's voice. And we start to forget what his voice sounds like too. So those are the two main points. But also, I wanted to just ask you, have you, so this is basically the third point. I encourage you to take some moments to listen to nature. Now, I realize this is a little bit easier to do if you're in a warm climate, or you live somewhere warm, or if it's summertime. I have found walking around the neighborhood is very energizing. It's calming and energizing at the same time. How does that happen? But it does. Just listening for the birds and whatever is in your environment, because God will use every means necessary to reach you and to help you hear his voice, especially if you're asking him. If you are asking God to help you hear him, then he will. Even if it's through the wind and the trees or the birds that you're hearing outside, or if it's through your child or your husband, or that coworker who's concerned, or somebody at your church. God will reach you in any means necessary. He's trying. He is a love in pursuit. I love to think about that. It's so true. He is pursuing every single one of us. So those are the three things I wanted you to consider today when it comes to listening, because these are ways that we can actively get ready during this Advent season so that we can be ready when Jesus comes, even if he's coming in the ordinary moments of the day. He wants to come then too. So we get to actively listen, and hopefully we can notice that he's there, because he is. So that is it for today. And tomorrow I will be back with another video to continue our Advent challenge, getting ready to be ready. And in the meantime, God bless you and all those that you love, and a happy Advent.